Hello, and welcome to the Spicy Pod Sleep Stories. I am Michael, and tonight we will relax with a story about a clever woman who scoffs at flirtation until she meets him. He's a charming rogue with a reputation, and she's certain she's immune to his games. But when he offers her one theoretical lesson in seduction, the line between play and desire begins to blur. The rain had begun just before dusk, soft and persistent, painting the cobbled streets in a silver sheen. Inside the warmth of the library, time moved differently, slow and quiet, interrupted only by the occasional rustle of pages or the distant crackle of a hearth fire. She had the room to herself, or so she thought. A familiar voice broke the silence. "You always do prefer the company of books over people." She didn't look up immediately. She knew that voice, smooth as silk and just as smug. He was leaning in the doorway now, utterly at ease, one hand tucked into the pocket of his coat, the other holding a book he had no intention of reading. "Perhaps I find people too loud," she replied coolly, turning a page. "And yet here you are, still speaking to me," he said, stepping further inside, rain dampening the dark curl of his hair and the collar of his coat. She glanced at him then, brief but deliberate. "I didn't invite you." He gave a lazy smile. "Ah, but the best lessons are rarely planned, aren't they?" She arched her brow. "And what lesson do you presume to teach me this time, sir?" He dropped the book onto the table between them. "Not too close. Not yet." "A lesson in seduction," he said simply, as if it were no more scandalous than reciting poetry. The words hung in the air, bold, ridiculous, thrilling. She looked at him and laughed softly. "You assume I'm interested in such a thing." "I assume nothing," he said, circling the table slowly. "But I've seen the way you look away too quickly, the way your fingers tighten when I stand too near. And now you're imagining things," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. "I don't have to imagine," he said. "You're far more transparent than you'd like to believe." She stood, finally smoothing her skirts. The space between them closed, though neither reached for the other. "And what, precisely, would your lesson involve?" she asked. He leaned in, just enough, not touching, never touching, just a whisper, a glance, the power of stillness, of silence. He murmured, "Seduction, you see, isn't about touch. It's about tension, the promise of something more." Her breath caught for just a moment, then she smiled. "Then let's begin," she whispered, brushing past him so closely her shoulder grazed his chest. He didn't follow, not yet. He only turned, his eyes trailing her with quiet intensity. "Tomorrow," he said, voice softer now, deeper. "Same hour, here." She paused at the door, looking over her shoulder, and this time it was her smile that made him still. Mysterious, slightly wicked, dangerous. Very well, she said. Tomorrow. The door closed behind her with the hush of velvet, and the rain continued to fall, quiet and steady, as if the world itself were holding its breath for what came next. The next day, the rain had passed, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and blooming jasmine that clung to the air like a memory. She arrived just as the last blush of twilight faded from the windows, casting soft shadows across the library's wooden floor. He was already there, Michael, no longer just a voice or a presence, but Michael, as she had learned from a note he'd left tucked between the pages of a volume on romantic literature. A single line: "If names are to be known, then let mine be Michael." And now, as she stepped into the library, their eyes met. "Emily," he greeted her with a subtle smile, his voice carrying her name like it was something precious, something secret. "Michael," she returned, letting the syllables linger. He had moved one of the armchairs closer to the fireplace, the flames crackling low and warm. Between them, a small table with 2 teacups, already steaming. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, gesturing to the seat across from his. Emily sat without breaking eye contact. "You invited me. That was yesterday. A lot can change in a day." She picked up the teacup, wrapping her fingers around it. Not everything changes so easily. He tilted his head, studying her. Still wary of lessons then? "I'm wary of teachers who smile like you do." Michael's lips twitched. "It's not the smile that should worry you. It's what I might say if I stopped smiling." The silence between them stretched, not awkward, but taut with potential. The fire's glow flickered over his features, catching in the gold of his eyes and the shadows beneath his cheekbones. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Tonight's lesson," he said slowly, "is about restraint. The moment before the moment, the space where attention lives." Emily's heart gave a small, traitorous thud. "And if I failed the lesson?" she asked, her voice quieter now, as if the warmth in the room might be listening too closely. His eyes didn't leave hers. "Then I suppose I'd have to show you again." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're not afraid of consequences, are you?" "I've already accepted them," he replied, "long before you walked in tonight." A log in the fire shifted, sending a warm crackle into the silence. Michael reached for a book resting on the table, a collection of poems. He opened it, flipped a few pages, and read aloud. "We live in the silence between words, in the breath that is held, the glance not taken." Emily looked away first. She had to, because if she didn't, she wasn't sure how this lesson might end. Tomorrow the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the polished floor of the old conservatory where Emily found herself standing. momentarily unsure why she'd agreed to meet him here. The air smelled faintly of citrus and dust, of history and unspoken things. Through the tall windows, the light filtered in like honey, and somewhere nearby, faint music played, classical, soft, like a memory. Michael stood near the center of the room, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, sleeves rolled back just enough to reveal the sinew of his forearms. He didn't look up at first, as if letting her observe him before he claimed the moment. She cleared her throat. I didn't realize today's lesson came with choreography. He looked up, that familiar half smile tugging at his mouth. Seduction, he said, like dancing, is all about rhythm, proximity, knowing when to close the distance and when not to. Emily raised an eyebrow. Are you really comparing flirtation to the waltz? I am, he said, stepping toward her, deliberate but unhurried. Both require restraint, and both can be dangerous in the wrong hands. She bit back a smile. And yours are the right ones, I assume. He held one hand out, not touching her, just offering. You won't know unless you try. She hesitated, her hand hovering near his, but not taking it. I thought you said tonight's lesson was restraint. Michael's voice dropped, warm and patient. That's why I'm still waiting. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of heat, hesitation, curiosity. Emily didn't place her hand in his, but she didn't walk away either, and instead, she stepped closer, letting only the space between their palms hum with electricity. And then, slowly, they began to move. No formal steps, no practice routine, just a slow, unspoken rhythm that swayed in time with the music in the background. He never touched her. Not really. His hand hovered near her back. His gaze danced with hers. And when she spun just slightly, she felt the air shift between them, like it was holding its breath. You're good at this, she murmured. At what? His voice was velvet and dusk. Not touching me. His smile deepened. That's because I want to. The music swelled, one final crescendo, before fading into silence. Emily stood still in front of him, her breath just slightly uneven. Michael's hands dropped to his sides. Next time, he said, maybe we'll see what happens when we break a few rules. But for now, they remained as they were, hands not held, hearts a little louder, and something unspoken blooming wildly between them. The next time, it had started as a quiet afternoon, the kind where the world seemed content to move slower. Outside the window, the sky was thick with the promise of rain, the clouds swollen and soft, like brushed velvet. Emily sat cross-legged on the window seat in the far corner of the library, a worn book balanced in her lap, though she hadn't turned the page in quite some time. The sound of a door opening, then closing gently, was enough to stir her pulse, though she didn't move. She didn't have to look to know it was him. He didn't speak, not at first. Instead, he walked to the opposite end of the room, carefully choosing a chair not too close, not too far, just near enough to feel his presence like a gentle current. The silence between them was not awkward. It was something else, richer, as if the air knew something they hadn't yet spoken aloud. She glanced at him finally and found him watching her, not in that overt way men often did, but quietly, as if he were trying to memorize the way she looked when she thought no one was looking. "You're early," she said, her voice a soft thread. Michael's mouth curved. "I could say the same about you." "I like the quiet," she replied. "I like it better when you're in it." It should have sounded like a line, but it didn't, not coming from him. There was a weight to his words and something more in the way he looked at her unrushed, as if he could stay in this moment forever and ask for nothing more than her presence across the room. "Do you ever stop?" she asked, teasing, but too gentle to sting. "With the charm." Michael leaned back in his chair. "I only use it when I want something." Emily closed her book. "And what is it you want?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood slowly and crossed the room, pausing only when he stood before her, still not touching. Always that deliberate distance between them. "I want you to think about me," he said softly, "when I'm not in the room." And just like that, he walked away. No flourish, no backward glance. Only the echo of his words and the quiet ache of how much hadn't been said. The 5th time they'd met, it was Friday, and somehow each evening had felt less like coincidence and more like something they were both quietly choosing. Again and again, the air was heavier that day, as if the week had gathered all its quiet glances, near touches, and unspoken questions, and wrapped them around the room where they now stood. Emily was by the window again, this time not with a book, but with a glass of red wine in her hand. She swirled it slowly, watching the deep burgundy legs crawl down the side of the glass, like they had secrets to keep. Michael entered without a sound, like he belonged there, like he'd always belonged there. "You changed something," he said, his voice low and amused. She raised a brow. "My wine?" "No." He stepped closer. "You're wearing your hair differently." She hadn't even realized. A simple twist pinned at the base of her neck, a few strands falling loose around her temples. "You notice everything, don't you?" she said. He stopped just behind her, not close enough to touch, but she could feel him, the warmth of his presence brushing the bare skin between her shoulder blades. "Only when it matters," he murmured. Emily turned then, and the movement brought them nearly chest to chest. Her wine sloshed slightly. She didn't step back. Neither did he. "It's our fifth meeting," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He nodded once, and still not a single real line crossed. Debatable. A long beat passed. "Friday," he said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "A good night to do nothing, or something unforgettable." Her heart fluttered, a bird against its cage. "And which one are we doing?" He took the wine glass from her hand, slowly, fingers brushing hers in that maddening way of his, and set it aside. Then he said, "Whichever you'll let happen." The fire crackled. Outside, the rain started again, soft and steady. She didn't move, neither did he, and still nothing happened, and yet everything did. The next day, Emily walked through the wrought iron gate, trailing her fingertips along the ivy-wrapped railing, her dress whispering around her ankles. She wasn't sure why she came, only that when he'd said, "Tomorrow, meet me in the garden," she didn't even think to refuse. The garden came alive just after sunset. It wasn't loud. It was quiet in that sacred way twilight tends to be. A hush that hummed with life. Crickets starting their gentle serenade, the rustle of ivy shifting in the breeze, the heady scent of roses and something citrus sweet hanging thick in the air. He was already there. Of course he was. Leaning against the stone archway, tucked in the dappled moonlight, as if he'd stepped out of some forgotten novel where men still wore desire like silk and danger. "Emily," he said, just her name, but the way he said it, it felt like an invitation and a confession all at once. "You're early," she said. "I didn't want to miss a second of this." "This," he smiled. "You, here, the night, the moment before anything happens." Again with the moments before. They're the most honest ones. They began to walk slowly through the winding paths. The garden had grown wild in the best way. Roses spilling over their bounds, lavender brushing against their clothes, the night pressing close around them like velvet. "Why here?" she asked. Michael looked up at the dark sky just visible through the trees. "Because here, the rules feel softer, like maybe if something were to happen, it wouldn't count the same." She stopped walking. He took one more step before realizing she wasn't beside him, then turned back. Emily tilted her head. "And what is it you're hoping will happen?" He didn't move closer. He didn't have to. "I'm hoping," he said, his voice a hush, "you'll whisper something you shouldn't." She laughed then, soft and disbelieving. "Is that your seduction strategy now? Getting women to whisper things in gardens?" "No," he said simply, "just you." She took a slow step toward him, then another, until there was almost no space left at all, and then she whispered something. We'll never know what it was, but his expression shifted just slightly. a flicker of fire behind his eyes. His breath caught just once. Whatever she said, it changed something, but neither of them moved to seal it. Not yet. Emily didn't step away, and neither did he. The whisper, whatever it was, still hung between them, like a secret swaying on a string. Fragile, dangerous, beautiful. She could feel it, the change. A tremor in the quiet, a shift in how he looked at her now, more focused, more knowing. It wasn't that the space between them disappeared. It was that it changed, became charged, heavy, electric. Michael exhaled, barely audible. You shouldn't say things like that. She tilted her chin up, playful. But you asked for it. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I told you, she said. I'm not afraid of the rules. I'm just curious about the consequences. He stepped closer, not touching, but just enough that she could feel the warmth of him. His voice dropped, barely above a breath. You make it hard to behave. Emily's pulse ticked faster. Good. They stood there, framed by blooming vines and moon-drenched petals, surrounded by a silence so deep it echoed. Neither of them moved. And yet the moment felt like motion, like falling. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled low and lazy, far enough not to be threatening, close enough to feel it in the soles of your feet. Emily looked up at him. Do you ever just kiss someone? His smile flickered, more restrained now, but no less sharp. No. Why not? Because the right kiss deserves the wait. She nodded, as if that made sense, and it did. Terrifying sense. So she turned slowly and began to walk back through the garden path. She didn't say goodnight. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because the air had already promised there would be more. The garden was empty now. Emily's footsteps had long faded, her silhouette swallowed by the winding ivy and moonlit walls. But Michael hadn't moved. He stood where she'd left him, hands in his pockets, gaze on the soft, overgrown path she'd disappeared down. It was strange how a single whisper could rearrange the air, could crack something open inside him that had been still for too long. He didn't even know what she'd said exactly. He only knew how it felt. The sound of her voice in the dark, the barely there smile on her lips, the delicious danger of possibility, and the restraint, always the restraint. He should go. He knew that. He should turn and leave and let the moment stay suspended exactly where it belonged. But instead, he walked a slow circle through the hedges, his fingers grazing the curling petals of a pale rose, still damp with dew. He remembered the way she'd looked at him, half curious, half daring, and the way she'd stood her ground, that mix of elegance and mischief, like she knew the effect she had but wasn't about to make it easy. God, she made it so hard to be patient. The sky rumbled again. this time a little closer. The air carried the scent of approaching rain, a hush before the storm. Always a storm somewhere, he thought. And then, as if summoned by memory, a soft laugh echoed faintly down the path, hers, low and musical and real. He didn't chase it, just stood still in the garden, with the echo, the rose petals, and the heat of her whisper still lingering on the skin of his thoughts. There was no kiss tonight, but there didn't need to be. The kiss was already there, stretched between them like a string pulled tight, waiting, humming, aching to break. And soon it would, but not tonight, not quite yet. Morning came gently. The rain had passed sometime in the night, leaving the world softened and clean. Leaves still glistened from where the storm had touched them, and the sky, muted and pale, stretched wide over the sleepy coastline. Emily sat on the low stone wall near the sea, her knees tucked up beneath her, a shawl draped around her shoulders. She hadn't planned to come so early, but sleep had been elusive, her mind too full of moments she couldn't name, of him, of that whisper in the garden, of the way his eyes had darkened, not from anger or surprise, but something else, something unmistakable. She hadn't even told him what time to meet, but some part of her already knew he'd come. And sure enough, she felt him before she saw him. Michael's footsteps were quiet on the stone path behind her, each one measured, unhurried. She didn't turn, just let the sound draw closer until he was standing just behind her shoulder. "You came," she said softly. "Of course I did," he answered. "You said nothing. That usually means everything." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure you'd understand what I meant." Michael stepped around her and sat beside her, not too close, but closer than before. His clothes were casual today. A linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, collar open. A small detail, but she noticed it. "I don't always need words to understand you," he said. They sat in silence for a while, the waves lapping below them, the morning breeze carrying the last scent of lavender from the garden. It was peaceful, too peaceful for the way her pulse quickened every time his shoulder brushed hers. Finally she said, "Do you ever think we've already crossed a line?" He turned his head slowly toward her. "Which line?" She looked at him, truly looked at him, those eyes that always held something just out of reach. "The one where it stops being a game," she whispered. He didn't answer, not right away. Instead, he reached up, slowly, gently, and tucked a strand of her wind-blown hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered, barely touching the curve of her cheek. She didn't move, didn't blink. "There's something in the space before a kiss," he murmured, voice hushed, "like the breath you hold, right before you fall." Her heart caught, and in that breath, just before it could become something more, he leaned in, close enough to make her forget how to think, close enough to taste the nearness, close enough to feel her tremble. But he didn't kiss her, not yet. Instead, his lips brushed her temple, feather soft, a promise laced in restraint, a whisper without sound. "I'll see you tonight," he said, his voice rough around the edges. And just like that, he stood and walked away, leaving her in the sun, the sea, and the space where something nearly happened. The sky had already begun its slow descent into dusk when Emily stepped through the garden gate again. She hadn't worn anything dramatic, just a soft dress in a pale, forget-me-not blue, her hair loose, falling down her back like she didn't care how the breeze would tangle it. But there was something about her tonight, something quieter, deeper, as if she'd stopped trying to keep her distance, and maybe she had. Michael was already there. Of course he was. He stood beneath the arbor where moonflowers had begun to bloom, pale white petals glowing softly in the twilight. His hands were in his pockets, his jaw shadowed with the hint of evening, his eyes already locked on her. Neither of them spoke at first. They just stood facing each other, surrounded by the scent of earth and jasmine, and all the words they hadn't said. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said finally. Emily smiled, just barely. "I was." He took a step toward her, then another, and she didn't move back. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about that moment," he said with a low voice. "The breath before, the not quite. It's been driving me mad." Her gaze searched his face. "So why didn't you kiss me this morning?" "Because I wanted it to be now." Another step. He was close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the fire behind his calm, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his skin. "And now," she whispered. He didn't answer, not in words. He reached for her slowly, giving her time to stop him, to say no. But she didn't. Her fingers met his halfway, tangled with his as if they'd always belonged there. And then he kissed her, not gently, not hurried, just deeply, with the weight of all the nights before this one, with a reverence that made her knees weaken and her breath catch. It wasn't rushed. It was earned. The kind of kiss that tells a story, the kind that tastes like surrender. And when they finally parted, her forehead resting lightly against his, neither of them said a word. They didn't need to, because the kiss had said everything. Emily didn't step away. She stayed close, still pressed to him, her arms lightly wound around his neck, her lips tingling with memory. Michael hadn't moved either. His hands rested at her waist, fingertips barely touching the fabric of her dress, as though he was still afraid he'd wake up and find her gone. Neither of them spoke. The world around them had gone hushed. The rustle of the garden, the distant hum of the sea, even the whisper of the wind, all of it quieted, as though nature itself had paused to give them this space, this stillness. Emily smiled against him, slow and secretive. "You were right," she murmured. "About what?" "The weight," she said. "It made this worse in the best possible way." He gave a low, breathless laugh. "I'm not sure I can survive another one." She pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes luminous in the moonlight. "Maybe you won't have to." There was something in the way she said it. A softness, yes, but also certainty. Like she'd decided something, and whatever it was, it's included him. He brushed his thumb along her jaw, slow and reverent. "You undo me, Emily." It was the first time he'd said her name like that. Low, barely more than a breath, as if it had been burning on his tongue this whole time. And it made her shiver. "I like the way you say my name," she whispered. "Say mine," he replied. She leaned in, her lips grazing his ear. "Michael," that single word, the way it curved from her mouth, was more intimate than any kiss. A heartbeat passed, then another. "Stay," he said suddenly, his voice husky, raw around the edges. But she only smiled, kissed his cheek, and stepped back with a teasing sparkle in her eyes. "Tomorrow," she promised, brushing his fingers with hers. "Let's not take all the mystery away in one night." And just like that, she slipped from the garden, leaving him standing in the scent of jasmine and the afterglow of something he knew he'd never forget. The garden was different now, not in the way it looked. Its blooms still glowed silver under the moonlight. The ivy still clung to its stone walls, and the soft hum of the sea still filled the air. But he was different. Michael stood alone where she had left him, her kiss still warm on his lips, her name still echoing in the silence. "Emily." He whispered it to the moon, not needing an answer, just needing to say it again. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in his thoughts. She was threaded through every one of them now. Every breeze felt like her breath, every scent like her skin, and the hush around him. It didn't press down the way silence once did. It held something now. Her. He leaned back against the old stone wall, tilting his head toward the sky. The stars blinked lazily above, as if in no rush to move the night along. And neither was he. He replayed the kiss, slow, like a song you don't want to end. The way her fingers had curled into the back of his shirt. The way her lips parted, hesitant, then sure. The way she stayed after. That was what undid him the most. She stayed. Michael hadn't realized until now how much of his life had been spent waiting for someone who would. Someone who wouldn't vanish at the first real spark. Someone who could stand in the heat of it and smile. Her, Emily. He could still feel her hand brushing his as she'd whispered, "Tomorrow." He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he didn't dread it. Not anymore. He turned slowly and began to walk home through the night. His steps lighter, the stars above feeling closer somehow, like they were leaning in with curiosity. And as he reached the gate, he glanced back once more. The garden behind him, wild and kissed by moonlight, still carried her scent, still carried the echo of the kiss that changed everything. Morning crept in slowly, on tiptoe. Golden light filtered through Emily's curtains, catching on the pale edges of her blanket and the loose strands of hair falling across her cheek. She stirred, but didn't rise. Not yet. The garden still clung to her skin. The memory of his lips lingered at the corner of her mouth. And her heart, it felt like it was still wrapped in that moment. That kiss. The softest thing about waking was remembering it had actually happened. She lay still for a while, fingers brushing the spot on her collarbone where his hand had rested. Her thoughts fluttered back to the way he'd said her name, not rushed, not casual, but like he'd been waiting for it, like she was a sentence he hadn't dared to finish until now. She exhaled slowly, and when she finally sat up, the cool morning air kissed her bare shoulders. Everything felt more alive today, brighter, quieter. She moved to the window, pushing the curtain aside. The sea shimmered beyond the trees, already pulling the morning into its rhythm. Somewhere beyond that horizon, another version of this morning might have gone on as if nothing had happened, but not this one. Something had happened, and it wasn't going to disappear. A soft knock at the door startled her gently, not urgent, not loud. She wrapped her shawl around her and padded barefoot across the wooden floor. When she opened the door, no one stood there, only the stillness of morning and a folded note on the step. She picked it up, already knowing. The handwriting was unmistakable. Michael. Her heart skipped once, maybe twice, as she unfolded it. I couldn't sleep, not from unrest, but from the memory of your breath against mine. If I see you again today, I won't pretend it's just curiosity anymore. It's you. It's been you, Emily. Her fingers trembled, but her smile bloomed, slow and sure. He wasn't running. He was inviting her into the fire with him, and she was ready. She found him by the sea. It was just past noon, the sun high and gentle above the tide, the wind tugging playfully at the hem of her dress. Emily walked the familiar path along the bluff, the same path she had taken so many times before. But this time, her pulse carried something different. She wasn't wondering if he would be there. She knew, and he was. Michael stood barefoot in the sand, sleeves rolled, hair tousled by the breeze. He hadn't seen her yet. His gaze was turned toward the horizon, thoughtful, and far away. But the moment her footsteps softened into the sand, he turned, and his smile unraveled her, not polite, not cautious, just open, like she was a certainty in a world full of questions. "You came," he said, as if he hadn't left that note, as if she hadn't read his words a dozen times already. "I never said I wouldn't." He took a step closer, then paused. That same delicious tension danced in the space between them, familiar now, warm, electric. "I meant what I wrote," he said quietly. She nodded. "I know. I don't want to pretend anymore, not with you. I don't want to either." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of every touch, every almost, every kiss held just a little too long. Then, without another word, Michael reached for her hand, not urgently, just certainly. His fingers found hers, like they'd done it 1,000 times. And this time, she didn't look away. She stepped into him, close enough to feel his heartbeat sync with hers. "You undo me," he murmured again. "You make me want to be undone," she whispered. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, lingering at her cheek. His thumb traced her jaw, then fell away, as if reminding himself they were still in public, still standing in the soft daylight, still one breath away. So instead of kissing her, he brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers. It said enough, and yet not everything, but that could wait. For tonight, the house was quiet when he arrived. No knock, no announcement, just the sound of his footsteps on the old wooden porch as the sky slipped into the golden blush of evening. Emily opened the door before he reached it. She didn't ask why he'd come, and he didn't need to explain. She simply stepped aside, her hand brushing against his chest as he passed her, leaving a whisper of warmth behind. Inside, the rooms were dim with twilight. No lamps lit, only the hush of Sunday settling in, the windows open to the scent of sea and jasmine. He turned to her in the center of the room, his gaze steady, her breath caught in her throat. Not because she was unsure, but because she wasn't. There were no more pretenses. Michael reached for her slowly, deliberately, his hand lifting to cradle her face like he'd been dreaming of this moment since the first time he saw her. His thumb brushed the corner of her mouth, gentle, reverent, and then, finally, he kissed her. Not like before. This wasn't a question. It was an answer. His mouth moved over hers with exquisite care, the kind that deepens slowly, the kind that lingers long after it ends. Emily melted into him, her fingers curling into the fabric at his back, her body answering without hesitation. The kiss deepened, lazy and intoxicating, pulling them both under. But just when it began to unravel into something hungrier, he broke away. Their foreheads touched, his breath warm against her lips. That was, she murmured, dizzy. A breath between the next, he whispered, his voice low and rough. They stood in the hush, hearts pressed close, lips tingling with what they'd just shared and what still remained just out of reach. He didn't ask to stay, and she didn't invite him. Some lines still held, trembling and delicate, like candlelight before the wind. But when he left, his hand lingered on her lower back, longer than necessary, and she followed him to the door, not because she needed to, but because she wanted the parting to ache, just enough to make the next time sweeter. Outside, dusk had turned to deep blue. Inside, her lips still burned, and in the quiet between heartbeats she smiled. The next invitation had been simple, a note tucked into the pages of the book she'd lent him. No flourish, no signature, just a time and a place. Tonight, after dusk, bring nothing but your warmth. Emily arrived to find the hearth already lit. The old stone cottage glowed gold with firelight, shadows flickering along the walls like memories. Michael stood at the window, back to her, one hand resting on the sill as if steadying himself. He turned when she entered, and the way he looked at her, like she was the reason the fire had been lit at all, stilled the air between them. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. She stepped out of her shoes and crossed the room, the floor creaking gently beneath her. He met her in the center, his hands finding her waist as naturally as breath. Her fingers reached for the collar of his sweater, tugging him a little closer, just enough to feel the warmth of him sink into her skin. Outside, the wind sighed against the windows. Inside, they stood in silence, watching each other like something sacred might break if they rushed. "You're here," he murmured, like it was still something he couldn't quite believe. She smiled softly. "You asked. I've been asking in every way but words." She leaned into him then, her forehead resting against his chest. He held her like she was made of something rare, his hands unmoving, his breath steady. The fire crackled beside them, casting soft light over her cheek, the hollow of her throat. He kissed her there just once, not hurried, not claiming, just promising. Her fingers curled into his shirt. His hand rose to cup her jaw, tilting her face up slowly. Their eyes locked in the glow of the room, and then his lips found hers again. This kiss wasn't tentative. It was the one they'd been moving toward for nights, and it deepened, a slow, spiraling warmth that pressed her back into his arms as the fire roared a little brighter. When they finally pulled away, neither stepped back. Not this time. "We're past pretending now," he said, voice low. "We were never very good at it," she whispered. They stood there long after the fire settled to embers. The promise of what would come next, not in words, but in the space between their pulses. Tomorrow would come, but tonight they had this. Morning light crept in through the windows of the cottage, slow and warm. The fire had long gone out, but its memory lingered in the scent of wood smoke, in the warmth still caught in the folds of the blanket they'd curled beneath. Michael stirred before she did. Not wanting to break the moment, he simply watched her sleep. Her hair fanned across the pillow, lips parted just slightly, as if she were still dreaming her way through the kiss they'd shared hours ago. His hand brushed her shoulder gently. She blinked awake, met his gaze, and didn't pull away. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice a little rough with sleep. She smiled, slow and unhurried. "Is it?" His grin deepened. "It is now." There was no rush to move, no need to explain anything. Only the warmth between them and the knowledge that what had begun as glances and careful distance had finally, fully given way to something real. "I never asked," she murmured, tracing a lazy fingertip along the edge of his collar, "what your name is." He laughed, low, surprised, the sound rumbling against her palm. "You never did." She raised a brow. "It's Michael," he said, and it sounded like a promise. "Michael Hale." She tucked the name somewhere deep. "It suits you." "And you?" he asked, eyes full of mischief and something far more tender. Are you going to keep me guessing forever?" She leaned in, lips brushing his ear. "Emily." Just that. But he closed his eyes as if tasting it. "Emily," he repeated, soft and sure, like the name itself had always belonged to him. "That's going to undo me." She pressed a kiss to his cheek, then whispered, "I hope so." They stayed like that a little longer in the gentle echo of all they'd discovered. No longer walking circles around desire, no longer pretending this was anything less than the slow, burning magic of two people who had been searching, without knowing, for each other. Not a grand, sweeping victory, just a quiet one. And sometimes that's the most delicious kind of ending there is. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's story. Good night and sweet dreams.